All right. So let's see how many people we have joining us right now. We're at like 37-ish. So I know it's the middle of the day. First of all, thank you guys for letting me reschedule this. I was invited to go spend some time in my kids' classroom this afternoon. So it wasn't added until last week. So that was why I decided to reschedule this till earlier in the day. I know it's harder for those of you who are working full-time and sort of launching your coaching business on the side right now. I know that makes it harder for you guys. So I appreciate you letting me be flexible so that I can go to my kids' classroom this afternoon. I'm actually really excited, and they're very excited about it too. First of all, I think they might be even more excited to have mom come into the room. So let's see, for those of you who don't know me, do we have any new people, any new members of either Financial Coaches Unite or new on one of these calls? Go ahead and raise your hand. Yeah, George, Carl, Terry, Stephanie, Jody, lots of people. And if you don't have your video going, then I can't see if you're new, but a couple of people also raised their hand. So awesome. Welcome. My name is Kelsa. I am a financial coach. First and foremost, the name of my coaching business is Fiscal Fitness. So if you were to Google Fiscal Fitness Phoenix, you will be able to find that. And you can kind of see the coaching business. You can look at our landing page, website, all that kind of stuff. I know people like to check that stuff out sometimes and gain some insights or ideas. I'm also the creator of the Financial Coach Academy and also Financial Coaches Unite, which is likely where so many of you found us. I started that group years ago now, really with the idea of like, I just wanted to get to know other financial coaches. I didn't know any others. I kind of felt like I was on an island all by myself, struggling through this business and client situations and, just figuring it out all alone, and started that group. And I had no idea it would be as amazing as it is, as collaborative of a space, as big member wise as it is. And so thank you so much for all of your participation in the group and all of that, for making it as amazing as it is. And I hope one thing you take from that is sometimes you just got to launch and it grows and expands and sort of like becomes even better than what you ever imagined. So just something to think about. You don't have to have it all figured out. If anything, what if whatever you're launching has the potential to be even better than what you're picturing right now, right? Because that is what has kept happening to me over the last 12 years of being a financial coach, is that I launched something with like my certain intentions, right? Like this plan. And every time it has turned out sort of like after a while better than what I ever imagined, just sort of like one thing at a time. And so sometimes you just got to launch with what you know and sort of figure it out as you go. So a couple of announcements. I always like to start these with just a few announcements. We do post about these things, but I feel like sometimes, there's so many different things you could be looking at. And so I don't want anyone to miss it. If you have been on the fence about the Financial Coach Academy or the toolkit, it might be a good time to dive in. We announced about a week ago a price increase is coming. So on March 31st, just so you know, we're giving plenty of time. I'm pretty sure financial coaches, we all like budgeting. We like to plan. I want you to have time to put it on your budget. If it's something you want to do, the price is somebody. That's weird. No, Stephanie's like, sorry,
that was me. I hit the wrong button.
Well, maybe one thing wrong you could do is mute the presenter. Yeah. That might be, no, I'm just kidding. Look at her face is so red. Stephanie is totally okay. It's fine. We're going to just laugh it off. It's totally no big deal, but I love how red your face is right now. I love you. It's totally okay. If anybody did it, it was Stephanie. So, and I just love that, right? Oh my gosh. I love it. Okay. Yes. Rachel says, love your term in the academy called messy action. Exactly. So, so the price is going up on March 31st. A couple of things to consider, you guys. We have added a ton of value in the last year and we did not raise the price at that time. So we kind of feel like we're just late on raising the price. So if you're wondering about that, for those of you who don't know, but even those of you who are in the academy already, there is live coaching every single month now. So we want to make sure you know that it is something that you get access to not for a limited amount of time. It is lifetime for as long as, we're around and the course is around and that kind of thing. Every single month, you can hop on a coaching call with me, ask questions, get feedback, talk about a client scenario you're facing, that kind of thing. It is incredible value. Try to imagine, 3 years from now, you're facing something and you could hop on a call and get coached, as part of something you purchased 3 years prior. So we think that is just an incredible value. We hope you think so too. We believe that the Academy is worth 5 to 10 times, that. And it is the most robust and thorough coaching program for financial coaches. I truly believe that. Thank you for those of you who have done it already and have trusted me to be a part of your coaching journey. We really appreciate it. The second announcement is that the mastermind is open for enrollment next week. So if that's something you've been considering, the mastermind, if you think about the difference between the Academy and the mastermind, the Academy is where you learn everything you need to know about how to launch your business, the design of it, how to coach clients, how to structure your business, how to ask great questions, how to actually teach various concepts and coach on various concepts. We're going to talk about a couple of those today as well. And it's like all the materials you could possibly need for your business, that kind of thing. The mastermind is all about applying those things. So if, as you are applying those things in your business, you want support or encouragement, or you just need a little bit of clarity on what you've learned how to do it. But as you're going to do it, you either have some mindset things pop up, some limiting beliefs, some hesitations, some worries, some fears, or like I said, just clarity on here's what I heard you say. I'm thinking about applying it this way. Is that right? Then the mastermind is perfect for you. So if you really want to be part of a community of other coaches that are doing amazing things every single week, please let me know. I'm going to go ahead and put in the chat a link to do a call with me, totally free call just to ask questions if you want about the mastermind. We can talk about whether or not it's the right fit for you. If it's not, I promise I'll be the first to tell you. If it's not what you need, I'll point you in the right direction. So there's the link to schedule it with me. If you want, feel free to do that sometime next week because we will be opening up registration in the mastermind. We only do it 2 times a year, just so you guys know. So if you don't want to join now, you can join 6 months from now. And we do that every 6 months. So keep in mind, it's really about applying everything you're learning. So if you need help with that, if you need finessing or anything like that, you have 2 options. You can join the coaching call every single month, and I'm happy to coach you. You get that as part of your Academy enrollment, or you can go into the mastermind. And we've got a few people on the call who are in the mastermind. We do tons of events every single month, coaching calls, trainings, all of that. Let me give you guys a really specific example because I think sometimes it's a little confusing on what the difference is. So next month, Erica, my systems specialist, so she's the one who kind of does all the behind the scenes stuff. So scheduling software, automation, setting up our systems, emails, all that kind of stuff. That's what Erica does for me. Okay. Erica has a training. We're going to post it in Financial Coaches Unite, just so you guys know. So if you're on this call, you'll get access to it. She did a training on the systems that you absolutely need in your business first and foremost, what they are and what that system needs to be doing for you right away. So very specifically, make sure if you have this software, make sure you have this part of it set up for yourself. Okay. So she did a training on that. We're going to post that in March in both the Financial Coaches Unite group and also for the mastermind coaches. The difference is that in the mastermind, Erica is also going to do an additional session, live session, where after the coaches have watched the video and they need help applying that knowledge, right? So this is the difference, right? As they go to take action on that, some questions might come up of I put this here, is that what you meant? Or how do I do this? My business is slightly different. So how do I do this one piece of it, right? And again, it's finessing and application of the knowledge. She's going to go in the group. She'll have a training, but also that live Q&A where she actually coaches and helps them with applying the knowledge, right? So that's really one thing to think about. So if you're the type of person who learns the information and then you hit the ground running, the mastermind may not be what you need. That's totally fine. If you're the type of person that thinks, man, if I knew a little bit more, if I could just get a little bit of reassurance, or if I could just run this by somebody, or, oh, if I could get, double check this with somebody before I take action, I would take action much faster. Then the mastermind might be a perfect fit for you, just so you know. Okay. So we'll be kind of talking about that a bit more next week, but if you have any questions, please let me know. Please reach out to me. Happy to answer any questions you have. So let's dive into today's topic, some client scenarios that you may be facing that you are dreading, and how to handle them, that way you're going into it, hopefully with a bit of a reframe of like, I don't need to be afraid of that situation if you haven't experienced it yet. Or if you have experienced it, you might have a better approach going forward, or you simply know going in, you have a plan of how you will tackle it once you do face it, right? So the first thing I want to hear from you, I have some, but I want to hear from you. What are some client scenarios that you are really, afraid of happening? Like you're not sure how to handle them. You're not sure how you'll respond. You sort of worry about it sometimes, and you're like, oh God, I hope that doesn't happen anytime soon. And maybe you can sense that it's like holding you back just a little bit. Like, maybe you're not being quite as bold because of a fear around these things. What are those things? Because if we don't have time to tackle them today, we can certainly do it at another time on another video, or I can do a post about it or something like that. Okay. A client wanting to back out after paying. Excellent. Asking for payment before meeting and not allowing cancellations. Okay. That the client will say they aren't getting value while working together or aren't making progress. Ooh, when they really need marriage therapy before you can actually help them with money. Clients who keep overspending, even though I have talked about the transformation that I provide, I can offer the guidance, but really need them to do the work. We're actually going to tackle that one today, Colleen. So that's perfect. I think that one will be, it's not specifically, but it's part of what we're tackling today. So I think it will help. Any other situations that you sort of dread or worry about? Okay. All right, so we'll start there. If you guys think of others, please put them in the chat and I'll review the chat afterwards and possibly do another training. Like I said, we'll see how many of these we can get to today. I've got a few that I know I've heard from coaches, in the mastermind, in the academy, that kind of thing that, they really worry over. And so we'll tackle these, and then we'll see if we have time for some others. Not valuing your time and giving your services away for free. Okay. All right. So the first one I do think is similar to, what I think it was Colleen said, but what if I have to tell a client no, that they can't afford something? So client wants to buy something. You are looking at their finances and it's very clear to you that they can't afford the thing they want to buy. Or perhaps they've already purchased it and then they come in and tell you about it after the fact. Have you guys faced this yet? And just kind of give me a yes or no in the comment if that's something you've faced. Yes. Yes. Okay. Almost like all yeses so far. There might be a couple of people who are no and just not yet, but it's bound to happen. Exactly. Not yet, but new to this. Great, Carl. No problem. Good. I'm glad that you're here. So you're exactly right, April. For those of you who have had it happen, think about like how you responded, right? Just kind of reflect on that. Go back to that time. Think about that. That way it's fresh in your mind. For those of you who haven't experienced it yet, just so you know, it probably will at some point, right? Client wants your approval or disapproval on a purchase, right? That's really what we're talking about here. And we all know a famous financial guru who is pretty blunt in telling people whether or not they can buy something, right? That is not financial coaching. And everyone on this call listening to this is a financial coach now. Okay. So officially, you are a financial coach. And so our job as financial coaches is to equip our clients with the ability to make amazing financial decisions on their own, not to make the financial decisions for them. Okay, so that is one shift we need to make. If somebody is coming to you and saying, can I buy this or can't I really want to encourage you to not give an answer to that question, not a clear yes or no question, okay? What I want you to think about as a coach is I want you to think about, how do you know that that's the decision? What are you looking at? What do you see that is making it so that that answer seems maybe more obvious to you, right? And what I want you to do is I want you to sort of deconstruct that process, that decision making, and I want you to facilitate that decision for the client. So I want you to say, you know what? I don't know. Let's take a look together and see what you think, right? And I tell clients all the time, like, it is not my job to spend or save your money, right? Like, that is not the role that I play. My job is to empower you to make a decision that you feel really good about yourself, right? So at the end of the day, whether you decide to buy this thing or not buy this thing, I simply want you to feel really confident about whatever that decision was, right? I don't have a horse in the race, in other words, right? Seems like we need to practice a poker face. Yeah, I think this is where I think our mindset really plays into this, because if we think that a client should not buy something, then yes, our reaction might be that that's the face we make, right? Is like, ooh, I don't know about that, right? Kind of like that kind of face. If instead we think the decision is not mine, my opinion actually does not matter, the client's opinion is all that matters, I don't have a reaction. I don't feel one way or the other about that decision. Now, here's another reframe for this, if it helps, Rachel, is I know what I would do for my financial position. I know based on that decision, would I buy that or would I not buy it? Is it important enough to me? Is it something I value? What is my financial position? What do I care about when it comes to making decisions? I know all of that about myself, which is why I can make that decision for myself confidently. My job as the coach is not to give the client all of those same things. It's to help the client determine all of those things so they can make the decision from that same place. And their value system, what they care about, could be very different than what I care about, right? So what I like to do is say, great question. Let's explore this together. Let's see, right? Because again, what I want to try and do is I want to try and take and make the decision as visual as possible for the client. Okay. So you can say, here are some things that we want to ask ourselves, or here's some things we want to look at in order to make this decision from a really solid place. Right. And some of those things are, I always like to do more of like projecting out than anything. So it's kind of like, if you were to make this decision to buy it, what would that look like? Right? So here's what your savings would be, or your credit card balance would become this. Here's the impact on your goals if you were to buy this, right? So again, whatever I'm able to see, because if you guys think about this, chances are what's happening is your mind, when you look at numbers, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're all a bunch of financial coaches. And I feel like this is something I've really had to realize is the way my brain works is what makes us good financial coaches. And it's not normal that everyone's brain works this way. I look at a spreadsheet or I look at someone's numbers and a picture has formed in my brain, right? Like it's so clear to me of like what I'm seeing as far as like what could happen or where are the gaps, what's positive, negative about that, all of that, right? My job as a coach is to take that picture that's in my head and deconstruct it for the client to make it so they see that picture very clearly for themselves. And the only way to do that is to really take that step by step with them, right? And I will oftentimes tell the client, I don't tell you whether you can or cannot buy something. That's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to help you think through this so that every time you make a decision, you feel good about the decision. We can't always, know what the future holds, right? So we don't always know sometimes when we make a decision, whether that's going to pan out. Is it going to pay off? Is it going to go as expected? Is it going to be better than we expected, right? Or is it not going to go the way that we expected in a bad way? We don't always know. And I believe, and I tell clients this all the time, that one of the best things we can do is trust that when I made the decision, I made the decision the right way, that I made it considering all of the right factors, because then regardless of what happens, I know that based on what I know to be true today, based on my knowledge and what I think and all of that, I can trust that I made that decision correctly, even if it didn't go as planned, right? So that's kind of what the empowerment that we want to give clients, right? There was something that I just wrote down today. Let me see, what was this? Where'd that go? Oh, yes. Okay. Can I forgive myself for what I don't know yet? Right? Can I forgive myself for what I don't yet know? And a lot of the times the client needs to learn to trust their decision-making process, not necessarily always the outcome, right? So back to this, if a client asks, I say, let's dive into this together. Let's look. I don't know, right? And so you can ask some questions like, why, what good could come from this decision? Why do you want to buy this, right? Or what could go wrong in this decision? What would make this decision one that you don't want to make? What factors are important to you, right? What things have you looked at when deciding if this is something you should buy or not? And the trap you want to avoid is that the client becomes dependent on you in order to make decisions. That is not the kind of coach we want to be, you guys, where every time they need to make a decision, then it's like they are relying on you and you are responsible then for sort of the outcome, right? And you don't want to portray that picture that all of this is a guarantee, that every decision you make with your financial coach is going to be a sure thing, okay? The other thing is you're going to see this from both perspectives. So I think sometimes we worry of like, my client wants to buy something and I have to tell them no. You will also see it from the other angle, which is my client wants to buy something, but they're telling themselves they can't afford it, but they haven't looked at the right things yet, right? Like they're not seeing their financial position clearly in order to know that that's even the right decision, right? So there's a lot of times a client will say, oh my God, you're going to be so proud of me. I was going to buy this thing, but I didn't because I know I can't afford it. Like they feel proud of that, right? In that moment. And I say, what did you look at to decide that you can't afford that? This is very common from a broke mentality. Is if you think about like my clients specifically, for so long, probably years and years, there have been things that they wanted to invest in for themselves, but couldn't because they couldn't afford it. And they immediately assume that that's always the case, right? Like that is that sort of broke mentality that even if I could afford it, I don't even know if I can because I'm just assuming that I can't afford it, right? So the idea is to really help them navigate that we don't want to jump to any conclusions, because the reality is like, if you want something, the question is like, how can we find a way to make that happen, right? Whether you want to buy it or not, it might be something I would never buy for myself, right? Doesn't matter. If you want to buy it for yourself, my job as your coach is to say, how can we make that happen? What would the impact of that be? And are we good with the impact? Because if you're good with the impact, there are a lot of times, you guys tell me if you've noticed this before, where a client will kind of paint that picture of, hey, the impact is if you do this, you can do it, but it's going to delay you paying off your debt by 3 months, right? So instead of a September date, it's now December, right? I'm just making this up, you guys, these deadlines, but like that kind of scenario happens. Or there's times where it's like, hey, you can afford this, but you have to take it from savings. That's really the only way. We don't have the money in your checking account. There's no really other place to pay for it. Like you'd have to take this money out of savings. Tell me, is that worth it to you? Tell me how that makes you feel. Fast forward a month, you have less savings. Would you feel nervous about that? Would you feel worried? Like, let's play this out months in advance, right? And you really want to try and have them paint that picture of how the decision has been made in both ways. How does it feel fast forward into the future, right? And there are times where they say, yeah, I'm totally fine with that outcome. Yeah, I know that if we take this mini vacation as a family, that means that we're not going to pay off our debt as quickly, but I'm okay with that. My job is not to make the same decision as the client, right? Every client might make that decision differently. My job as a coach is to make sure that they're very aware of what the decision is and the impact it's going to have so that they can make that decision on their own. Does that make sense? Okay, questions about this. Questions about how to sort of navigate this. You really want to make sure you don't find yourself in a position where clients feel like they can always come to you for approval or disapproval. Also, I want to say really quickly is if as a new coach, the hardest part is to not put my spending philosophy on the client. 100%, Rachel, so true. When I say there's not one way to get out of debt, there's not one way to budget your money, there's not one way to manage your money, not every client should be doing things the same way. I know that is like a really hard thing to like understand practically, like how does that show up when we are coaching our clients, which is why I want to do these, trainings every single month, because these are the scenarios where it comes up, where we are attaching, how everybody should do it sort of philosophy to these types of conversations, which is how the conversation then flows differently. Where if instead we're saying, I don't know the answer to this question. I don't actually know if a client should or should not buy this, but my job is to help them decide that for themselves. I feel like it really does. Yeah, this new way of looking at coaching. Exactly. Good. So what you want to be careful of is, when a client comes in and says, I bought this, was that okay? So now it's like an after the fact kind of thing, right? I see a lot of head nods right now. So you guys have been there, done this. And if you haven't experienced it yet, I will tell you, like, this is a really hard situation to navigate because you're kind of in a no-win scenario if you think your job is to actually give an opinion to the client in that moment. Because if, let's say, they should not have made that decision, but they already made it, I promise you that affects the coaching relationship because it feels like you're beating them up for something that they already did and they can't change it now, right? It's just not solution focused. So what I do is I always say when a client says that, and again, they're looking for approval or disapproval, right? To me, there is a sign here that what they are looking for is validation that they made the right decision. They're looking for validation, possibly because they don't feel 100% confident in their decision. And that is the part we want to clue in on. Why don't you feel 100% confident? What did you look at when you were making this decision, right? What part of this do you not have clarity around that is making it so you want to know what I would do, right? And again, this is just, you're really trying to form the dynamic between you and the client of like, I'm not going to approve or disapprove of your decisions. That's not my role. It also helps, I promise you guys, if you adopt this new approach, kind of like what we're talking about, you'll be surprised by how the questions you get from clients are actually up-leveled. Because what happens is they think through a scenario before they bring it to you. So instead of saying, should I or shouldn't I do this? You're going to get a question like, okay, I want to do this. Here's what I've thought about, right? Here's what I've considered. And the question will probably be more like something like, what else should I be considering that I haven't yet thought to consider yet? Help me think through this. Do you see what I mean? So in other words, it's like either a yes or no answer that is like a transaction, or it's about, am I thinking about this correctly, right? Are my thoughts in the right place? Or is my decision-making process happening correctly, right? They're actually learning about how to make better decisions going forward, which I think is like an incredible transition to make for a client, right? When they make that shift. So when they come in and they say, I've already done it, I always say, I try not to weigh in on decisions after the fact. So you're not going to know whether I think that was good or bad because I don't have an opinion. I really don't, right? And I tell that to a client. I say, but my concern is that if you're, wondering if you made the right decision or not, that tells me you don't have the confidence in the decision that I would love for you to have, right? Which is that when you make a decision, I want you to know I made this decision right. I'm really proud of this decision. Even if somebody else would make it differently, that doesn't matter, right? Like I made this right, okay? So then I just start asking questions. What did you consider? What did you look at? What was your thought process like? What was your decision-making like? What kinds of things did you look at? What did you see would happen when you made this decision? Like, what did you project out? What did you look at for your future as far as what the impact of this decision would be? And chances are for a newer client, just so you guys know, these are all the things they probably haven't considered yet. Like they didn't make the decision considering all of those things, right? But by doing it in that moment, you can say, these are the types of things going forward. I would love if we chatted before you made a decision, because I want to be able to help you think through that entire decision-making process, not because I have an opinion on whether you should or should not do something, but because I find it easier to coach you thinking about a future decision than sort of like thinking about a past decision, right? And again, so you're not harping on them. You're not making a big deal out of it. You're not saying, yep, that was terrible. What were you thinking? None of that. It's like, we don't actually know, right? Because the process that they undertook is what's most important. Does that make sense? I see some head nodding. Any questions about this? Any thoughts coming up, good or bad? Are you liking this sort of approach? Is this what you would have done? Maybe not what you would have done, but you're going forward. I had a client ask me, George says, I had a client ask me about taking a job that she had just interviewed for. She would not take I do not know as an answer. That is one of those where I'm like, how could I possibly know for this person if that is like right or wrong or whatever, So I would say, George, where are you? I'm trying to see where you are on my screen. Okay. Hi, George. Okay. So I would say, also, you guys, I should tell you, George sent me a very lovely message yesterday, didn't you, George, right? You sent me, thank you for that. That was really nice on Facebook. So I appreciate that. So I would say, taking a job is a perfect example, George, of that scenario that I was discussing earlier, which is like that even if we make that decision with all of the right considerations, it is a leap of faith. Working at a new place is always a leap of faith, right? Like once you get into an organization, it could be a hot mess for all you know, right? Or it could be like even better than what you thought it was going to be. Like, I don't know. I don't work there, right? Like, so I would say, what kinds of things are important to you? What did you consider when making this decision? Why are you thinking this is a job? Why did you interview for it? What are you looking for that you even interviewed for a job, right? And again, you guys, I think one of the best things you can do is help try to paint a picture of what the impact of that decision might be, right? And I talked about this in another call, but you can say best case scenario, what's going to come of this decision? What would make this the right decision to make? Like, what would you like to see happen in the future, right? And how sure of those things are we that they're going to happen, right? So when people make decisions, if you think about this, they always make decisions with like the best case scenario in mind. So I think about a client who wants to buy a rental house, okay, like a property that they're going to rent out. Usually the thought process when a client shares this goal with me, they say, we want to buy this house because we're thinking we could buy it for this, but we could rent it for this. We would cash flow positive $500 a month. And then that would speed up our debt snowball. And then, yada, yada, like all of these really great things, right? Very, very true. That could absolutely happen. I like to say, in addition to playing out that scenario, as far as best case scenario, I like to play out what would happen in a worst case scenario? And are we still willing to make this decision even if worst case scenario were to happen? So when it comes to a rental property, what if you have to go a year without it being rented because we just can't find a good renter or something, or 6 months? What would we do? Instead of it being cash flow positive $500, what if we actually had to pay out of pocket to carry the house for 6 months because we don't have a renter in there? Or if we had to spend a few $1,000s to turn it over because the previous renters trashed it, what would we do? Right? Like, let's just play that scenario out. And the idea is to prepare for worst case scenario, not because we expect it to happen. I'm totally an optimist for sure. But because if I am making a decision and I have planned for worst case scenario, then when the outcome happens even better than that, because I'm an optimist. I believe that it will. I don't believe that like worst case scenario is going to happen. I am happy. I'm even happier, and I'm prepared for worst case scenario. Right. So it's one of those things where it's like, I didn't just make it with like all the rosy thoughts. I actually considered sort of the pitfalls of the decision. And that is really important, right? So like we made this decision, and not only that, but if something bad does happen, like let's say in that rental property example, somebody for 2 months, doesn't have it rented. I promise you what happens is like, you know what? It was only 2 months. We thought maybe it could be 6. We were ready for this, right? Like it literally changes how they feel about a whammy happening when it happens less than what they thought the worst case scenario could happen. Does that make sense? Are you guys seeing this? Okay. So, let me see some of your guys' comments on, okay. So helpful. Good. Love the approach. Definitely more empowering for the client. Absolutely. And, safer, but also truly like from our perspective as coaches, the role that we should be playing, right? Like really and truly that we are helping them to make good decisions, not making a decision for them. Okay. We're also removing sort of our preconceived ideas or our opinions from things, which is really important. I appreciate playing the decision out and seeing how they feel, not just this month, but possibly several months out. Exactly. Confusion about a decision could also mean that they're missing information. They don't even know what questions to be asking sometimes, right? So sometimes that's where our job is, just to ask a whole bunch of questions like, what about this? What about this? What about this? And helping them to think through it from a whole bunch of different perspectives that they maybe wouldn't have. Okay. Sounds like this is really about helping clients apply good critical thinking. Carl, oh my God, thank you for saying that. I always say in the academy all the time, and for clients in our coaching business, that it's not sexy, but what we teach is critical thinking. And I know that's like not the sexiest thing to say you help people with, but it's really what we do. Because instead of saying, here's always the answer, or here's how you always do things with every single person you come across, it's here's the questions I ask, here's the process I use, and the answer at the end of that could be different for each client, but we're using the same framework every time. Right? So it's critical thinking in that way. Okay. The second scenario that I think people worry about, coaches specifically, is what if I get asked a question that I don't know the answer to? So a client's like, whether it's like, what should I do about this? Or what do you know about bankruptcy? Or what do you know about refinance rates right now? Or something like that. So tell me in the comments, like if there's been a time where you're like, I'm really worried about a question I might get that I'm not sure how to answer, or I don't know anything about that, and I feel bad saying that. So just give me some comments here and tell me what you guys think. Rachel says, I love helping self-employed people figure out their billing rate to cover worst case scenario. Just realize this. Exactly. Because you always know like your backup plan then, right? Like you always know, if I got to do this, I'm good. Like this is what, if something were to go terribly wrong, here's my worst case scenario. And the goal, of course, the stronger your financial position, you guys, the less likely worst case scenario would ever happen anyway. You're like, oh, I'm good. Even if worst case scenario happened, I'm still secure. I'm still safe. And that is really important for the client to be able to acknowledge that, right? So we don't want to rob them of that clarity and that confidence of like, even if worst case scenario happens, I'm still good. I'm still ready. I'm still prepared financially. I'm going to be okay. Like you want them making a decision with that much confidence. Okay. That's a great question. Let me do some research and get back to you about that. Good question. I don't know the answer. Let's talk about how we could find out. I love that. Yes. Okay. Perfect. I think if you guys think about your own financial journey, if there's one trait I would love to instill in all of my clients, and also kind of what I try to instill for myself and my own finances, is curiosity, right? And I believe when we are asked a question, well, first of all, let me just take a step back and say, the reason I say that is because for some reason, when it comes to money or personal finance, when people don't know something, there's a lot of shame attached to that. More so in the world of money than almost any other topic, right? It's like, if I don't know something, I must be dumb, or see, I never learned that, or I'm bad with money. It's like, it gives people this confirmation in their mind of like what they already believe to be true about money, right? It's this really weird thing. I think about all the questions my 5 and 6-year-old ask me. And I think, there's days where I think, God, can I just like not answer a question for once? Like, that would be really nice. But the idea is that like, I don't fault them for asking those questions, right? Like, just yesterday, my son asked me like, what do they carry in the back of semi trucks? What are they carting around in semi trucks? And I was like, that's a good question. He can't see inside of semi trucks. He has no idea what's being. So I gave a whole bunch of examples. It could be this, it could be that. Like, it's like, what a great question. That's so curious, right? That he was able to ask that question. I want people to feel the same way about their money at every level, whether you are getting out of debt, whether you're saving money, whether you're investing, you're creating leverage for yourself, you're starting a business, you're growing a business, you're having kids, you are retiring, you're any number of things. Chances are the first time you have to do that, it's the first time you've ever made that decision. There's no way to know what you don't know until you do it, right? So what I like to do is, I think one of the best ways we can instill some of these traits with our clients is to simply demonstrate them. It's the same thing I try to do when I'm, sharing with all of you guys about things. If we make a mistake, I own it, because I hope that you will lean into your mistakes as a business owner, that kind of thing. I try to demonstrate for you sort of the mindset that I want you to have. I want to do the same thing with my clients, right? So the idea is, similar to what you guys were saying in the comments, like I say, ooh, I actually lean into it and I say, this is a great question. You stumped the coach, right? Like, I don't know, but I love learning new things about money, right? So again, I'm demonstrating curiosity. I love exploring new things when it comes to personal finance. And what I would love, so the only caveat I would have, this next part, a little different, just one very subtle change compared to what, let me see, where did it go? That comment. Stephanie says. So Stephanie said, if you guys remember, that's a great question. Let me do some research and get back to you about that. Very, very close. Subtle difference though, Stephanie, is let's tackle this together. Let's figure this out together, right? Here's what I think we could do. You research X, Y, and Z, or you find the answer to this question or this question, right? I'm going to find the answer to this question, right? Or I'm going to look at these parts of the decision, right? And then next session, let's come together and we'll teach each other what we just learned. So you're actually, this is a really beautiful dynamic that can happen with your client, where you are actually you're showing them that you believe in them, that they can be trusted to do some research, to ask some good questions, to do some digging and that kind of thing. And we'll figure it out together, right? So that's really just the one subtle difference there, very, very slight difference. And say, I like to use it as an example of, just so you know, this will probably be the first of many times in your life where we don't know something about money, right? Like if you are always, I say this in the some of the videos, where one of the things you always want to do in all of your coaching is you always want to kind of thread in and out this mindset or philosophy that money is a lifelong journey, that we are always learning. We're always growing. We're never done. We're always probably doing the next thing with our money. So like at every stage, it's just sort of like, okay, what's next? What now? Right? That's kind of the way I think money works. I think about my own journey with Michael, and it's like every year or two, it's like there's something new we're doing with our money that we hadn't had to do before, right? So the idea with that, this is a perfect example where you can illustrate that again, where you can say, this is the first of many times. If you continue to grow and expand your mindset around money, this is just the first of many where you won't know the answer, right? So let's explore this together. Let's learn together. Let's find a way to apply our curiosity together, sort of thing. Yes, awesome. Okay, good. So I actually think, I hope, and this is the reframe that I want to invite you guys to take. I think that there are pivotal moments like in the client journey that like really transforms the relationship overall, and you can't force them. You can't. It's just something that will organically happen sometimes, earlier, sometimes later in the client journey. This is one of those where I can't wait for it to happen. I actually want it to happen as quickly as possible, because it's that thought of like empowering the client and letting them know that we are in this together, that we are doing this together. We're on this journey together. We're going to like learn together as we go, that sort of thing. It completely up levels the way the client views themselves in their journey, right? So the sooner it happens, the better. And you get to demonstrate, like I said, that curiosity. And instead of sort of like just talking with them about, I want you to be curious on this journey, it's actually like you just get to like encouraging it real time and in the moment. Okay. So instead of fearing this or dreading it, I can't wait for it to happen. Actually, like I want it to happen as soon as possible in the journey. So I hope that reframes your scenario a little bit. I also think really quickly is to kind of play out how sometimes our hesitations or our worries hold us back. If you are dreading a client asking you a question you don't know the answer to, then you could get a prospect reach out to you and say, hey, I'm looking for a coach who could help me with X, Y, and Z. And if you haven't experienced that yet, that decision, you haven't had a client experience that yet, or if you're just like, oh, I don't really know much about that area, you could actually kind of like keep them at arm's length and sort of like push them away a little bit, sort of subconsciously, if that makes sense. Because in your mind, you're like, oh, I don't know if I know enough to help this person. I'm not sure if I know the answer. So I don't know, maybe I'll refer them to somebody else, right? This is different than if it's not your ideal client, that's fine. You are more than welcome to do that. But this is like, you're sort of telling them you can't help them because you're afraid of sort of learning with them, versus if you trust yourself to sort of dive in and say, yeah, let's do that. I know I can help you even if I don't know the answer, because I trust my own curiosity and I trust my ability to bring curiosity out from the client. Then it's sort of like any scenario a client sort of gives you, you're good, right? Like it actually is easier to say yes to prospects that you can help them, and your business can take off even faster. Okay. Again, I think that's a bit of a subconscious thing that happens, but just something to be aware of. Okay. Any questions on that one before we move on? Thoughts? Give you guys a minute. Okay. Number 3. We'll see if we can get through this one in 10 minutes. And then, if we have some time at the end, we'll see. I don't know if we will, but number 3 is, what if I run out of things to talk about, or the client doesn't have anything they want help with? And so they come to a coaching session. I'm kind of like, okay, so there's nothing to talk about, sort of thing. Tell me if you fear this. Give me a yes in the chat or a no in the chat if this is something you've thought about. Like, oh, what will I do? Ooh, Rachel says such a fear. Not as much as I used to. Not anymore. Yeah, I'm assuming that the 2 people who commented that are a little bit more experienced, because it does change over time for sure. So I truly believe there's always more, for sure. There is more. And this is like this mindset of like, we can know there's always more we can do. We just don't know if we know what that is, like in real time, to be able to like, respond or that sort of thing in that moment. So the reframe for you guys is the best way to grow as a coach, I think, is with real clients challenging you. So out of necessity, if you're like, okay, I've been working with this client for 4 months, my program is 6 months long, and they are just like doing everything right. So they're getting through everything really, really fast. And I'm like, I can see that I'm like kind of running out of things. I promise you that you will not let that client down, right? Do you know that about yourself? Like, that's one question to sort of ask yourself is like, would I just like let the client down and just be like, no, we're going to keep your sessions and we're just going to stare at each other for an hour? Like, I don't think any of you would do that, right? It will trigger your creativity. Out of necessity, you will problem solve, right? You will say, what else could I do with this client? And you will come up with something, right? You could post in the group, I have this client, here's what she's done or they've done or whatever. What other things could I do with them? And you have a community of financial coaches who could give you ideas, right? And say, what about this? Would you consider this? I think about when I first started my coaching business, I thought that I would meet with somebody for like, let's say 4 to 6 months. I think in my mind, I thought it would be like 4 to 6 sessions, right? So I'm really trying to think back and I'm like, okay, I'm going to meet with them. I'm going to teach them everything they need to know in that amount of time, for sure. They're going to be like great budgeters. They're going to be out of debt in that time, no doubt. And then they're going to be good. We're done, right? They don't need me anymore. And one thing that I know transformed for me was when clients would like reach their goals and they would say, like, they would be like, okay, so we're scheduling for next month too, right? And then they would actually want to keep scheduling out with me. And I would be like, oh, like, it was kind of a new concept to me of like, oh, they really like, they actually just like the coaching, right? They actually love the experience of coaching and having somebody ask them questions and having someone to talk through decisions with and like all of those types of things, right? And that was when I thought, wow, there's so much more I could do with people, right? Like, I could be working with people for years and years and years, and they still will never tire of it, right? Which is a pretty amazing thing. Coaches ask me all the time, most of my clients now have been with me for years, and I mean like 7 or 8 years probably. So, I've had my same client list for a very long time. And I know coaches say like, what do you talk about still? Like, what are you still talking about with them, And I will tell you, the conversation is very different. We don't talk about like, budgeting or can I buy, they have all of that dialed in. They are like really good with their money, right? But what they like to do is talk through decisions that they have coming up and make sure that they're thinking about all the things, right? So they'll say, I'm trying to make this decision. Here's what I've considered. Is there anything else that I should consider? And we just talk about those things, right? Well, what about this? What about this? And this is where your own curiosity as a coach will be your best friend. Because if you are just genuinely curious about what that client can tell you about that decision, you will be able to find sort of gaps in how they made that decision, right? So, you'll say, well, what about this? And they'll be like, oh, I hadn't even considered that. Like, I'm glad you asked that question, right? You will also think about the client. Let's say it's that 4-month client and they've got 2 months left in their program. And I promise you, you can just think about that person and say, they're still struggling with this part of their money though. I can see it. Like, it's not normally part of my program. I hadn't thought about that before, but now that I have a real client in front of me struggling with this thing, I can see it clear as day, right? Now, you may not have a handout to teach them about that. You may not know how to coach them through that, but this is where your clients will actually help you to grow as a coach better than anything you'll ever do, right? Because you'll say, I think about the time when I had a client and they were struggling with like comparisonitis, right? It wasn't the same as like keeping up with the Joneses. It was more like this idea of conforming to norms, if that makes sense. Like, it was just something I could tell that, like, when they made decisions, they always considered what other people would think of that decision, where not every client will do that. Does that make sense? Do you guys see what I'm saying? Like, it was just something I observed about them. I was like, they're always wondering about what people will think of them and whether or not they're fitting that mold, kind of thing. And I remember just sitting down one day and like Googling like the psychology of comparing ourselves to others, the psychology of worrying about what people think of us. Like, why do we conform to norms versus the non-conforming personalities? Like, this is just, I just kind of like started going down that rabbit hole of like, I don't know where this is going to lead me. Right. But let me see what I can come up with. And if there's anything that sort of resonates for this particular client. Right. And then, just so you guys know, all of that research is what led to our value-based conversation around. So if you, I've shared it in Financial Coaches Unite, but it's in the academy, it's in the toolkit. All of that is like helping your clients to make decisions from a place of values. Like, what do they value, right? And helping them identify their values. There's a whole exercise that we do now with our clients where every decision they're about to make, one of the filters is that they run that decision through their values. What is the impact on your values, right? When you are making this decision, not just your finances, but what is the impact on your value system? Does this support your values? Does it pull away from your values? That kind of thing, right? That whole handout, which we've been using now for years and years, came from me simply researching, why do some people like care what others think and other people don't? And what I learned in that was sort of this idea that like people who, don't feel firm in their own beliefs, like sort of their own values, like what's important to them, oftentimes weigh what's important to other people when they're making decisions, right? Because they don't know themselves what's important to them. And that led to not knowing what their values are, not knowing what's important to them, not having that clarity. And now that exercise is something we do with every single client without fail. We actually do it oftentimes every single year because your value systems can shift over time, especially during times of like big life changes and stuff. And so we actually do it all the time with our clients. But that exercise came from me simply having a client that like I noticed something about, like I observed something that I could tell they needed help with, but I didn't know, I didn't have a handout for that or anything like that. Now, at the time, I didn't have a group like Financial Coaches Unite where I could have shared and said, hey, I have a client who I can sense this, I can observe this behavior. What are some things I could do with them? But that is absolutely something all of you could do. And I hope you will do that, right? Where it's like, hey, you could ask this question. You could have them do this exercise. You could have them reflect on this, all sorts of things. We've got some incredibly smart people. Amazing coaches. So the idea is I wouldn't shy away from not knowing the answer to something, right? Or not having something for them to do. Also, one reframe around this is you want the client to always be saying like, here's what I want for my life. Here's what I want to yet achieve with my finances. Here's where I'm seeing I could grow, right? So one thing that I want to challenge you by is that you alone are responsible for determining their journey and what they learn. Okay. There is a part of that where you are the leader and you're going to observe things that they can't simply see in themselves. That's why I have a coach. That's why I hope you guys have coaches, is because they're going to reflect back to you something you say and you're like, oh, no, yeah, now that you say it back to me, I don't really believe that. You know what I mean? Like it just happens sometimes. So the idea is that what I want you to do is if a client comes to a session, you can have a series of questions ready to go where those questions will actually determine sort of the course of their journey going forward and how they answer it. So for example, some things like, tell me what's going really well with your money right now. What are some of the things that are happening financially for you that you feel really proud of, right? So have them share those things with you, okay? Then say, what are some things that you wish were better about your finances? What are some things that you still feel really hesitant by or you don't feel confident in, right? You can also ask a question like, what is something you've heard when it comes to money? And you sort of acknowledge to yourself that you don't really know what it means. Like you kind of hear it, whether it's on the news or you hear people talking about it, and you've heard it so much that you think you might have an idea, but you don't really know for sure. And you would really like to feel more confident and clear about that area of your finances, right? You can also ask a question like, fast forward a year, fast forward 3 years, or fast forward 5 years. Where do you see your finances being 5 years from now, right? Like, what would you love to see? What would you love to say is happening for you financially 5 years from now, right? And here's the thing is, in those answers, I promise you, you will find something that you can still help them with, right? So if they say 5 years from now, all of a sudden they want a rental property, right? That should like give you this, like pique your interest of like, ooh, we should talk about that. We should talk about what it's like to own a rental property, all the different options, whether you have a property manager, like those types of things. So that way we are getting you ready to be able to take that step, whether it's 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, right? So all of these questions are things, here's where the rub comes in. The reason this situation comes up where there's nothing to talk about with a client, okay, is because up until that point, if you were to think about the things you've done with the client, you're probably problem solving. You're probably helping to solve a problem that has already arisen, right? Or prevent a problem from occurring. What you are transitioning the conversation to be about, though, is there is no problem to solve. There's nothing wrong, right? But we still want to talk about the future, right? So it's not that there's a fire I need to help you put out. There's not some crisis we need to avert. What we are now shifting the conversation to is how can we take what is already good about your finances, right? Like we're probably making progress, you're taking action. You feel better today than you did when we first started coaching. Those are all beautiful, beautiful things. It's good. And now we're shifting to how can we make it great? There's no sense of urgency here. There's no deadline. There's nothing that says we have to figure this out today, right? But we want to transition our clients to thinking about the future of their finances, right? And talking about things before there's like a serious need. Like we actually want to be having these conversations long before that. And that transition happens when you reach a point where there's like no fire to put out, there's no crisis, that kind of thing, right? And if you're not careful, if you don't ask these questions at the front end of like, what about this? And how are you feeling about this? And those types of things, where do you want to be 5 years from now? What would you love to see happen with your finances 5 years from now? If you're not careful, a client will feel like they need to come to a session. And in order for that session to be productive or valuable or not a waste of their coach's time, they need to have a problem that you need to solve. Do you see that? Like they might actually bring a problem to every meeting because they think that's your job, right? We don't want them to have that belief. Like there doesn't always have to be something wrong. It could be that like everything's good. We just want to talk about how are we going to make it even better? How can we make it greater, right? Not because there's some urgency or anything like that, just like in therapy. Yes. Also, I just want to say that John, and I don't know, is this your wife, John, sitting next to you in the lovely pink shirt? Yes. Yes. She's drinking a glass of wine and I am very jealous right now. Is that wine? I'm assuming it's wine. Yes. Yeah, I'm very jealous. It's 1:30 here. So I'm thinking it might be a little too early for me to have a glass of wine, but I'm having a glass of wine later because you're tempting me with one. So I'm going to have a glass of red wine later. Okay. So I hope that makes sense, you guys. It's sort of like this transition that needs to happen is a very subtle one. And your reframe. So one thing I want to talk about really quickly, and then we got to hop off, is Yeah, maybe wait till after you go to your kid's school. That's a really smart move. Yeah, good call, Stephanie. Yeah, that's really, really smart. We're also going to get this afternoon pictures for our kids' passports so that we can go on vacation. So we're pretty excited about that. Let's hope that they sit still for a passport photo. This should be really interesting. I'm definitely going to need a glass of wine after that. Okay. One thing that I want to just touch on really quickly is, and then we're going to wrap up. So much of these situations we dread come because of sort of like we're making it about ourselves oftentimes, right? Like we're making this about like our own insecurity or being vulnerable in that moment or admitting that we don't know something. And what I want you to think about in all situations, but especially these three that we discussed, and I'll save the chat and we will definitely tackle some of those other ones, either as a post or, in a future video or something, is how could I, in the way that I respond, be best for the client in this moment? So like almost like remove yourself from it and make it about the client. What does the client need from me in this moment? How can I show up for the client in this moment? It's not about me, right? It's not about my own nervousness or anything. It's about how I could demonstrate bravery or courage or curiosity or decisiveness, or even sometimes it's like, how can I demonstrate calm around a decision that feels really stressful, right? So like not taking the client's problem on myself and just staying calm about it, being patient. Sometimes if you guys have noticed, a client comes in and they're like feeling stressed about a decision and they're like, you can just tell they're sort of like, I got to do this. I got to figure this out, blah, blah, blah. And really what is best for the client in that moment is for us to take a deep breath and say, we're going to figure this out. Let's take a pause. Let's, be patient. Let's, figure out when do we need to make a decision by, right? Do we need to make it right in this moment? Let's, sleep on this. Sometimes a client will message me, and I will say, I want you to sleep on this. And tomorrow, let me know some ideas that you have, right? Because I can tell in that moment, they can't even like think of ideas or solutions, right? And so sometimes that's what the client needs. And I could respond and be like, I don't know, or, oh my God, I'm worried for you, or, oh gosh, all of those things. But it's like, actually what the client needs in that moment is to just take a deep breath. Okay. How do you respond when a client is not open to dreaming? When asking questions, they respond, I don't know. I experienced that yesterday and did my best to continue. So I think there's a couple of things here. One, I would say, is it that they're not able to, or that they are unwilling to? Those are two very different sort of perspectives. Like it could be like, if a person's like, yeah, to me, there could be depending on what they're saying they want for their money, what their goals are, that kind of thing, they could just be like, yeah, I'm good. Right. Like that's, coaching could sort of be done, right? Like, okay, like we're good for right now. We've solved the things you wanted to solve. Where I work best with people going forward is where we really start to align your finances with what you want in the future. So, if that's not something that interests you, like some people just don't care, I guess you could say, right? Like, I don't want that for you, Christina, but that's just something to be aware of, is like, it's an unwillingness, right? Then there are others that just really aren't able to, right? And I would say this is where giving them one journal prompt question at a time, Christina, can be really helpful. So a question around something like, where do you see yourself in 5 years, is way too broad. Like that is way too, like they can't even get their mind to go there. Does that make sense? So what you can do instead is really help them break that down into a baby step question. So you can say, I'm going to give you some questions to think about. You can journal them out. I think that's probably best for a lot of clients, is to actually like pen to paper journal it out. But you could ask a very specific question. So you could say, 1 year from now, how do you feel about your health and fitness in your life? Right? Just that. We're not talking money. We're not talking, finances, we're not talking career, none of that. Like, it's almost too much for them to consider it all in one big space. So you can really help them break it down. And it's almost like flexing a muscle that gets stronger. You're trying to get them to just think about one little piece into the future, and then another little piece, and then another little piece. And it's sort of like they're getting stronger in thinking about the future. Does that make sense? Now, with this person, you said unwilling, she was short in her responses. I think, you guys, this is, and then we really got to hop off. I think this is where, like, our agenda for a meeting, sometimes we forget that, like, the client is coming to a meeting with feelings and emotions and circumstances that also happened that day, right? And we don't know what those things are. So if I was noticing some resistance, and I don't know if this client is like typically resistant, or if it was just like a one-off scenario, or like whatever the case may be, but especially if it's like a one-off where it's like, oh, that's weird. Like, normally our conversations are fun, or like they're, fine. I would say I probably would pause, and I would personally, like, set down my pen, and I would set down my paper, whatever it is. And I would probably just, like, Susan, I'm, just noticing, are you okay today? Tell me how you're feeling today. What's going on? Like, is there something going on? Like, I'm just noticing that maybe you seem agitated, or you seem frustrated, or you seem, bothered by something, clients. Jill did a really good video in the, Financial Coaches Unite, you guys, about how to coach a client who's in a crisis scenario. She had hopped on a call with a client. The client had just gotten some really bad news. And I think she got the bad news like the night before, but it was very obvious to Jill that, like, this client was, like, not herself, right? Like, and the client didn't originally say anything. Jill could sense it, right? And sometimes we're going to sense it in a subtle way. Sometimes it's, like, very obvious, right? I think the best thing we can do is acknowledge it. And sometimes the best thing we can do is just listen, right? Like, we're not solving problems. We're not taking action. We're actually just there to help you process where you're at today. Now, you do want to be careful that you are not always playing that role with a client, right? So there's definitely some nuance here. So don't hear me say that you're just always sort of like the person who plays that role. But I think in this case, you could say, I'm sensing, like, and you guys have heard me probably say this before on coaching calls. There's times where I'm like, I'm reading in between the lines a little bit. I may be wrong. Please feel free to tell me I'm wrong. It's okay. You can tell me that, like, what I'm picking up on is not accurate. That's fine. Right. But what I'm picking up on right now is that you seem upset. You seem bothered by something. And, like, let's just take a step back. Like, tell me what's going on. Tell me how you're feeling. Tell me what kind of day you've had. Are you feeling the weight of something right now? Because it seems like something is heavy for you, right? And let them just share. And Christina, it might be, I know if I'm, like, really stressed about something that day, and it can be like a minor decision that we need to make, right? But or I have to, like, enforce a boundary that can be, like, put me in a total tizzy, right? Like, I can also be like, I'm not in a good mind space right then. I'm not coachable in that moment. And it's not because I don't want to be, it's because I just can't do it in that moment. Does that make sense? And so you want to make sure that that's not what's happening too, and say, hey, like, just talk to me. I'm here. Like, we don't have to, like, be productive. Sometimes what's most productive is creating space for whatever you've got going on in your life right now. Does that make sense? So I would maybe, think about that as, like, when you sense it, being able to pivot a little bit and not sort of keep going down the path that you were going down, that you intended to take, but sort of, circle back and say, we can talk about this next session, sort of thing. Okay. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. Please let me know your thoughts. We will tackle some of those other situations in a future training. I hope this gives you some fresh perspective, some reframes for how to handle some of these situations in the future. And I will see you guys in Financial Coaches Unite. Thank you for being such amazing members and coaches. And if you have any questions about the Financial Coach Academy or the Mastermind, please reach out to me, schedule a call with me, and we will get your questions answered. I will talk to you guys later. Bye, everybody.